Good afternoon and welcome to the weekly update from the Department of Behavioral Health. Please ignore the first slide, which has the wrong date. I changed the date on the other parts of the presentation, but failed to do so on this one. All right, it remains October is LGBTQ plus History Month. I think it's in the next, maybe tomorrow, that we have an event going on that you'll see advertised. Please, what time, Brian?
12 o'clock.
12 o'clock. So please tune in at 12 o'clock on our Facebook page or YouTube Live, and we'll be happy to include you. Moving on, we have now just over 242 million cases of COVID and just under 5 million deaths worldwide. In the United States, we have over 45,234,000 cases and over 731,000 deaths. In California, slowly going down. We went from 2.2% positivity last week to 2.1% positivity this week. Definitely in the right direction, but tiny little incremental changes. Unfortunately, in Fresno County, our cases, while the cases appeared to be going down previously, we had a slight increase this week. We certainly had more deaths as we anticipated. For youth, we went up by about 500 cases just in the last 30 days. And hospitalization is where we're really seeing that increase. We were at 247 last week. We're now at 291 again. And so it's a little discouraging right now. We were on a nice decline, 296 about a month ago, and now we're back up to 291. And it seems to be described by the positivity rate, which I'll go over in a minute. Kids hospitalization, just kind of hovering there. Not too many kids in the ICU, which is good. But our testing trends, we've went up. Last week we were at 7.5%, and this week we're at 8.1%. So it seems like people are letting down their guards. We may be getting a few breakthrough infections. And we still remain with one of the highest unvaccinated populations in the state, which I'll go over in just a minute. Our vaccine update for Fresno County, we're now over 1.15 million doses of vaccine, some good improvement since last week, but not nearly where we need to be. We still are under 500,000 fully vaccinated. I keep waiting and waiting and waiting for that number to go up. For youth, we now have 39,420 who are fully vaccinated between the ages of 12 and 17. We do hope our youth numbers will go up when the Pfizer vaccine is approved. Trend-wise, while we're coming down, you heard me that we are also seeing an increase in positivity, and we still haven't gotten anywhere near the overall state's positivity. As far as tiers go, every single county in the Central California region is still in the purple tier for case rate. Some have dipped down into the orange tier, that's San Joaquin. The rest of us, with the exception of Merced, are in the red tier. Merced is persistently in the purple tier, so still a lot of work to do in the Central Valley. So cases are going back up a bit, hospitalizations have increased again, deaths are increasing, and the positivity rate has increased. So another gentle reminder about the flu vaccine, please get your flu vaccine. And then we'll go on to California. New COVID cases, as I stated, have continued to decline, including positivity, continued decline in hospitalization. Of note, and I'm going to show you a graph in a minute, when you look at raw numbers, Fresno is second in the state for hospitalization. So we are 10th in the state for population. So you would expect us to have far fewer individuals hospitalized than several other counties. The only county ahead of us is Los Angeles, and they're like 10 times bigger than us. So that's a little discouraging. So this next slide is an updated slide that I had shown you a couple weeks ago. These are the 13 largest counties in California. Left to right, San Francisco, Santa Clara, Contra Costa, Alameda, San Diego, Orange, Ventura, Los Angeles, Sacramento, Riverside, Fresno, San Bernardino, and Kern. The orange line shows you their vaccination rate, and it goes from 77% at the high down to 52% for Fresno and 45% for Kern. Fresno and Kern have the highest per capita hospitalization. We remain one of the highest hospitalizations across the state. And with our lower vaccination rate, this is a graph that if you have any doubts about the effect of vaccination, this is a pretty simple graph. Counties that have higher vaccination have lower hospitalization, period. There's really no disputing it. Whether natural immunity or other things impact it, the fact remains in counties where there's higher vaccination rate, we have lower hospitalization, period. Not up for debate. Okay, nationally, cases do continue to trend down, about a 25% decline overall in the last 14 days. Hospitalizations overall are down, but we still have trouble spots. Colorado, Vermont, and New Hampshire. Alaska is still struggling. Just before I came down here, the CDC did endorse boosters for Moderna and Johnson & Johnson. That had went through FDA approval today, CDC. So stay tuned on our plan. Most individuals, if you got vaccinated through the county's effort, our department's efforts, you likely got Moderna as your vaccine. And so we will be strategizing and understanding through the Department of Public Health how vaccine doses will be administered. One unique thing about Moderna is that the dose you will get for a booster is half the dose you got for your first 2 shots. So there'll be a little bit of work that needs to be done for the staff who are administering the booster shots to understand what that means and how to do it safely. And so we'll be working on that. But expect to have a plan in the coming few days. The CDC is also considering the mixing of vaccines. So if you got Moderna to start, getting Pfizer, for instance, as a booster, or Pfizer or Moderna if you got Johnson & Johnson. And so I expect some decision-making on that in the coming days and weeks as well. Worldwide, Moscow now is instituting severe lockdown. They have a rise in cases and low vaccination rates. They're almost experiencing 1,000 deaths per day. So they're working very, very hard to get their vaccination rate up, but having to lock things down there. Canada has now developed a vaccine passport for travel, and India has now given 1 billion doses of vaccine. That's a lot of vaccine. And there's a lot of people in India. We talked about that when they have had outbreaks. So I thought I would briefly talk about when will the virus become endemic. This is something I frequently hear, particularly from people who are tired of the lockdowns, tired of the masking, tired of the vaccination mandates, really just want us to get to an endemic place. And an endemic situation just means we've learned to live with the virus. It's not causing significant death, hospitalization, impacts to the healthcare system. And the common cold is a coronavirus that absolutely has become endemic. I believe there's 4 different versions of the coronavirus that we now experience as a common cold. But you really have to understand a little bit about the nature of viruses and the nature of vaccines to understand when and how COVID will become endemic for us. The one issue is just the nature of viruses. We've talked about this before. I'm just going to go over it again briefly. Viruses have only one goal. They don't have a brain, they don't think, they don't have a political party, they don't subscribe to any religion. They simply want to replicate. It's all they were made to do. They're a fairly simple structure in the sense that their only goal is to find a host, commandeer that host, replication, production lines, and replicate itself. That's all they want to do. Their goal isn't to kill you or make you sick. That there's no benefit to the virus to do so. If they kill all their hosts, they won't be able to replicate, but their goal is to replicate. They're not super sophisticated, so sometimes they do kill or make the person sick who they invade. So it's an imperfect system for them, but their goal is to replicate. And they evolve and adapt to continue replicating. One of the things to keep in mind is the more people who get the virus, the more chance that adaptability will occur and variants will emerge. One of the challenges with COVID was it was a brand new coronavirus, which means no one on Earth had immunity to it or antibodies developed for it. This doesn't happen very often. It hasn't happened a lot in our lifetime. Most of us who have experience with any sort of virus have either had that virus in your lifetime, like people my age, chickenpox and mumps and measles, you might have gotten the virus or you may be vaccinated against it. But there were those in our lifetime have existed since before our lifetime. And so it's very rare that we've had new viruses that have emerged. The type of viruses that have emerged that have come to our notice, whether they've actually existed in human nature, in nature or in a population that we never knew about, things like AIDS, Ebola, and SARS and MERS, who are other types of coronaviruses. And so it was always predictable that a new virus would emerge, particularly as the population has grown and as countries have moved into areas that previously were dominated by nature and different species and such. You often will get that animal to man transmission of a novel virus, a virus that's previously been in an animal and present for generations and hundreds of years will make that jump to the human being, and sometimes with deadly consequences. And so COVID was a new coronavirus and one we didn't have experience with. Again, most of the common colds are coronaviruses. So coronaviruses have been known for a long time to scientists and researchers, but they're each a little different. They're not predictable. I think we get used to with medicine that, well, they'll know what to do. And when they don't know what to do, well, they're lying to us or they misinformed us, when really we're learning about this new virus. Oftentimes with new viruses, we might have a theory about how it transmits, either by touch or exchange of bodily fluids or respiratory. Those are the typical ways that viruses transmit from one person to another. But it takes time and really research and study to understand what is the main mode of transmission. And so when COVID first came about, that lockdown period was really an attempt to buy ourselves some time and prevent spread while we could figure out what we were dealing with. How transmissible was it? How deadly was it? And because we didn't know a lot of mistrust developed over time, unfortunately, and people have persevered in that lack of trust because of mixed information that came, and as we learned, things changed, and that's been challenging. But when COVID spread globally, because of the nature of transportation and such now, back in the 1918 period of time when the Spanish flu happened, people weren't flying across continents and across the world, and they weren't doing it in a timeline where a virus like this could spread across the globe so quickly. But COVID really taught us that, particularly for a virus that has a latent period, so a period of time when it's transmissible but you're not sick, really allowed the global spread of COVID. And that's another thing that's different about different viruses. Some viruses are only transmissible when you're expressing symptoms. So you're coughing or you have a fever, you're vomiting, you're bleeding, that type of thing. With some viruses, that's when it's transmissible. Those type of viruses often are more deadly, but they don't necessarily spread as much because people get sick and they're not out and about spreading it. COVID is one of those viruses that has this period of time where you don't know I'm sick and I can give it to you. And so that spread did a few things. It made a lot more people sick, and it allowed the virus to develop variants. And variants really come about because during that replication process, mistakes occur. Some of those mistakes are disadvantageous to the virus, and a variant might emerge that humans can overcome fairly quickly. And so that variant would just die out and it wouldn't continue. Others are more transmissible. And some are better able to overcome your immunity. So, for instance, one of the first version of coronavirus, the alpha variant, the beta variant was more transmissible, but it also was able to overcome some of the body's natural immunity it developed. Delta variant doesn't have the same adaptability as beta, but it's more transmissible than beta. And so the Delta variant became predominant. It may not be as good at overcoming your immunity, but it overcame the beta variant because it was more transmissible. And what we don't know is what will be the next variant, and will it be more transmissible, or will it be more deadly, or cause more serious illness? So this is the nature of viruses. They are unpredictable. The longer we have uncontrolled spread in parts of the world, the less we'll be able to predict. And even our own vaccination rates in Fresno County, in the state of California, in the country of the United States, while important, won't necessarily slow the spread of COVID across the world, and certainly the development of these additional variants. And most of the variants that have emerged in the midst of significant spread. So for instance, the Delta variant came about in India when that very large population that India has had a huge outbreak. And so the sooner we can get immunity across the world, particularly with vaccinations, the sooner we can limit the amount of variants and the amount of spread and the ability of vaccines or natural immunity to overcome new variants. Generally speaking, most viruses over a period of time while they evolve will settle in. Like some things you can't change, like the transmissibility will never be that if I have COVID in this room, I'm going to give it to someone in San Francisco, for instance. But the transmissibility between us in the same room can change. So there's some things we just don't know, but generally there is belief that slowly but surely the virus will evolve to a stage where it will likely be present, it will likely be like a common cold or such, but most of us, either through having it or having vaccines that helped us develop immunity to it, will have enough immunity that it'll be more like the common cold. So I will talk just a little bit about vaccines since we've talked about it previously, but I'm just going to refresh your memory since we just talked about viruses and how it's going to become endemic. So the goal of vaccines is to stop that replication. If the goal of the virus is to replicate, the goal of vaccines is to stop the replication. So generally all vaccines, whether they're live or a dead version, an attenuated version of a virus, or mRNA, messenger RNA that teaches your body to make a protein that your body sees as an antigen. An antigen is a foreign body and helps you develop that immunity. All of them are designed to stop the virus from replicating. And to help you build these antibodies. So if you think of an antibody as something that locks onto the virus and prevents the virus from getting into your cells and accessing your replication machine that you have in your cells. And so one way or another, that antibody stops that from happening. The body also, when you develop an immune response, your body also develops memory cells. And so the memory cells reside in your body over time. Some of them are called B cells, and B cells produce new antibodies when an antigen comes. So antibodies do disperse out of your blood. If there's no antigen to fight, they just go away. But the B cells sit there, and they wait for that antigen to show up again. And they're able to produce antibodies, and they also produce antibodies that have slightly different variations to be adaptable to virus as well. Last week when I talked about natural immunity, that natural immunity makes those B cells produce slightly more variations of antibodies, so it can provide maybe some more protection to variants that come. So those are defensive in nature. Once the antigen comes, they're trying to, block, they create the antibodies, and those antibodies try and get on the virus and keep it from reproducing. There's also T cells that are part of your memory cells. So when you get that immune response, either from having the virus or from having a vaccine, the B cells are memory cells produced through that response, and the T cells are memory cells produced through that response. T cells kill the virus cells. They don't try to block it from reproducing. They kill it. They eat it up. And so they're more offensive in nature. It's an offensive defense in your body. And so when that antigen comes in, that virus comes in, they have learned what it looks like, and they eat it up, right? Like a Pac-Man. They eat it up. And so that's your body's immune response. And that can be produced either from getting a virus and surviving it or getting a vaccine and stimulating an immune response in your body so that it can recognize that antigen, that virus, when it presents itself to your body. All right. Why don't vaccines work forever? Well, actually, some do. Generally, live vaccines don't need a booster, although some do, but generally they don't. There have been some challenges with live vaccines because you're giving someone a virus. They try with some live vaccines to give a less lethal version of a virus or a smaller dose of the virus. We talked about that with smallpox when we talked about what George Washington did, where they inoculated people against smallpox in the army by giving them a version of smallpox, and some people died from it, but far less than those who got smallpox. And so you don't typically need a booster when you get a live vaccine, but there may be some inherent risks with live vaccines. And some vaccines don't work together and work forever. And it's really the nature of the virus itself and how it evolves, or if it evolves. And so some vaccines are given in a series to boost an immune response. There's a schedule of vaccines that typically are given to kids for chickenpox and MMR and the Tdap, all those different vaccines that are given. They've learned over time that if you give them in a schedule, so some are given at birth, some 6 months, 1 year, 2 year, 4 years, 6 years, that type of thing, that you get an immune response and that lasts for a period of time, and then you give a booster shot and you boost that immune response, et cetera, et cetera. Sometimes with vaccines, immunity lessens, and so you'll need a booster shot because it's going to decline over time. And sometimes the virus itself changes, or there's multiple versions of the virus, like influenza, where each year there's a lot of epidemiological work done across the world to predict what version of influenza might be prevalent in the following year, and that's why the flu shot is different every year. Not so that they can insert a different microchip every year. Anyhow, just kidding. All right, so that's really what we're contending with to get it endemic. We need to get the spread under control so that we don't have those variants emerging. We need to let the virus evolve to a point that it's happening in our communities, but enough of us have immunity so that the impact of it is mitigated to the point that it's not interfering with how healthcare operates or hospitalizations or severe illness or death. And if I had a crystal ball, I'd tell you when that happens, when that's going to happen. But those are the things that we'll be watching. Obviously, when you're seeing positivity rates increase and hospitalization go up, it's really too soon to talk about endemic. It's really too soon to talk about, well, enough people have been vaccinated or have it that it's going away. Not really. We have to get way, way down in positivity rate to get a handle on this. And so for the foreseeable future, we should just, be prepared for those of you who are willing and able to get a booster shot, to get that and to continue with wearing our masks and behaving in a way that hopefully keeps the spread from overwhelming us again. So that's my presentation today. We will see if there are questions. Got somebody willing to get the Moderna booster. Excellent. All right, let's see if there's any questions via text. Maybe because I started late, people didn't really tune in. If you're watching this via recording later, we don't have a lot of people watching live right now. Please feel free, as always, to send your questions in via email to Tina Young or myself. We'll be happy to address them either via email or on next week's update. I don't have any more questions today, and so we will see you next week. Now, I believe next week is our all-staff. I have a special guest attending the all-staff meeting, Dr. Reyes Vora, our public health officer. Dr. Vora is an expert in this. I'm really good at reading lots and lots of articles and scientific magazines and journals and compiling information and putting it into my presentation. But Dr. Vora is a physician, he's a toxicologist and an emergency physician and truly an expert. And so I hope next week when we have the all-staff meeting that you guys will come prepared with questions. Feel free to send those questions in advance, particularly if it's a particularly complicated or thorny question. We'd love to give Dr. Vora a chance to be prepared so that he can answer your questions during the live session. He's really good on his feet. There's really no question that he would not be willing to answer. And so please come prepared to ask even your toughest questions of the expert. And so that will be next week, I think on the 26th. And that in lieu of our update next week, we'll have the all staff and we'll have Dr. Vora there. So please tune in and be prepared. Feel free to send in those questions ahead of time. Thank you, guys.